request my next speaker, Dr. Radhika Trikha, researcher and DST-STI SENI Policy Fellow, to speak. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kamakshi. And am I audible? Because there is echo that I am listening to.
Yes, yes, you're audible. Yes.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Kamakshi, once again. And thank you, Dr. Vashne, for giving an opportunity to deliberate on such an important issue. And as a woman, I feel this is a very substantive point that we are making through such conferences, that we need to bring forward the women participation in science, technology, innovation, and the budding field of science diplomacy. In India, science diplomacy is budding right now. From past 4 to 5 years, we have started knowing about this field, and we have started working and gaining experience in this field. And I still feel there is much more need to uprise the women, in fact the younger girls, to take up this dedicated field of science diplomacy. So for my talk today in this conference, I will focus mainly on three sections. The first, I'll talk about certain gender issues. So my colleagues in DST, STI fellowship group, they have carried out a detailed study on what are the key assets and gaps for women to participate in the STEM field. They particularly called it a SETI field, that's science, engineering, technology, and innovation. Innovation is also a very important part that we need to take care. And then we evaluated what are the key assets that are happening, what are the gaps, and what are the key challenges, and how policy makers can address those challenges. With this, in my second section, I'll focus more on what is the India's take on enhancing the women participation in science, technology, and innovation. What are the policy level changes, program level interventions we have introduced? And then last, I'll talk a little bit about the science diplomacy and role of women in that. Already Paulina has walked us through what are the relevance of women in science diplomacy and what efforts has to be done and why it is required. I think so I'll just touch upon those because Paulina has excellently addressed those factors. So I'll first start with the key assets that we have in terms of when we talk about the gender participation in the field of science, technology, and innovation. The key assets that we hold is that we have started recognizing the gender parity right at our primary and secondary education levels. That is, like in most of the countries, we have seen that now we are talking about that there is the gender disequality, and we need to address those factors. And right from our school education, we have started focusing on these things. The other asset, when we talk about the country ecosystem who are dealing with STI, is that we have defined legal and policy level interventions to improve the women participation and performance in education and in labor force as well. Then, as we are talking about role of women in science diplomacy, of course there are a number of international collaborations which are coming forward, which are promoting women participation in science. As Paulina has already given us an example of Uzbekistan, more of the women scientists, they are coming up and they're looking ahead for the partners globally to form a kind of an collaborative engagement to take the science and innovation forward. But these are the certain assets that countries are working towards it. They are understanding that there is an issue. We have United Nations sustainable development goal that in 2030 agenda we have two dedicated goals related to gender equality and women empowerment. Of course, this has brought the importance of addressing this issue, but still there are certain gaps which are existing. The report which I have the inputs of the reports which I am talking about, that took care of a South Asian countries including India, and we had a focus group discussion with the women scientists, experienced one at the leadership position, and even the younger researchers who were working in field of science, technology, and innovation, to understand what actually the gaps are existing In terms of gaps, there is lots of gender disparity at a higher education level. We see that number of women graduates are there, but how much of they land up in a higher education and further to the job related to science, technology, and innovation. We need to address that gender disparity. That is definitely one of the gaps. Then there is an unequal labor force participation. Mainly the young researchers, they said that when they are compared with their male counterparts, there is loads of disparity in terms of how their results, how their outcomes are being taken forward when it is compared to the male counterpart. And always we see that there are, like, it's my personal experience, like I was in biotechnology field, and out of the 20 students in my class, 19 were the girls and there was only one boy. But when I look forward to how many scientific fraternities working in these universities, in the ministries, the number of male counterpart is definitely much more when we compare to the female counterpart. So this was one of the gap that they have addressed specifically in South Asian countries. Then there is another gap that is existing in terms of socio-cultural stereotypes. When we are talking about science technology, we somehow miss this aspect, that how much socially and culturally stereotyped women are. Like it's like, specifically if I talk about my experience, like when we go for a maternity leave, there is a 6 months gap that we have to face. And then when we return back to our workforce, then there is some kind of stereotype that you won't be able to contribute that much. And we need such kind of balancing environment where working mothers and the cultural adaptation of women has to be taken care of. Then if we talk about the other gaps, there are certain institutional constraints due to male dominated work culture. That was the maximum input that we have received specifically from the Asian countries. That is one of the key feature that we face. And there is absence of women leaders in key thematic areas. We need more of the women leadership positions to be created, where women can come, they can address, and they can vote vouch for changing the whole environment in the ecosystem of that particular institutional area or a thematic area. So there was certain way forward that the report has suggested when we had focus group consultations with the experts in the field. And the way forward that they have stressed on is, we need to bring a kind of an awareness and sensitization among the women as well as the other scientific fraternity. So it's not only that we have to push the women to come forward, we have to also stimulate our whole ecosystem to be cordial environment for the women to participate in science, technology, and innovation, and also to create incentivization mechanisms for them. Then we need to have gender responsive policies and programs. I'm very happy that India has taken a substantial measure in this line. The new science, technology, and innovation policy is already in its documentation phase. It's been released in a public domain. I'll urge every participant to have a look on the National Science, Technology, Innovation Policy that you can access from Department of Science and Technology website. It has a dedicated chapter in that starts with the name Equity and Inclusion. I'll run down what are the main attributes of this equity and inclusion, and how it is stressing on the fact that we need to bring gender equality along with other social equality. We want to address the other social dilemmas also, how we have to push uh, the people who are facing some kind of discrimination based on caste, language, geography, the parents. So all these factors are being addressed for the very first time in a scientific policy for India. Then in terms of way forward, we need to have a leadership building abilities for the women. We need to create more posts for them, more opportunities for them. And then we need a dedicated mentoring, training, and incentivization mechanisms for women to come forward. And most importantly, where science diplomacy will come, we need an international engagements that have to be followed, that will that will present the examples globally that can be adapted by the countries. Well, this is happening in that country, why cannot it happen in our country, and why can't we collaborate that with the women scientists in other country and learn from their experiences. So we need, definitely we need vehicles of change. You can say this is a kind of a policy maker's guide when they design the legalities and administrative policy measures for women to come forward and address this gender issue in science, technology, and innovation. So we first need to understand there is no one woman thing. So we need to recognize the overall efforts and women's heterogeneity. And we need to begin early. We need to address this gender responsiveness education in the early stages, like right from their primary education. We need to inculcate the culture among the women and among the young girls and boys that we need to address this gender responsiveness. Then it's very important that for a vehicle of change to occur, we need to build bridges. We need to have institutional bridges and support network for translation of science, technology, and innovation education into the careers for women. We need to have a leveling fields. For the vehicles of change, the other thing that we have to strongly promote is coming together. We need to bring up the collective groups such as support networks and advocacy groups as forums for women in city. And in fact, I really congratulate the Tillotoma Foundation along with the DST who has come forward to address this issue. We are talking about this, we are popularizing this concept. That is very essential. And the other way forward that we should look forward is to create a change makers and role models. Now, when we see the women leaders, like especially like Dr. Renu Swaroop, who was also who led the very important department for science and technology, Department of Biotechnology, and then she is leading many different advisory committees who are working for science, technology, and innovation. She is definitely one kind of a role model for us, and we are aspiring for other role models we have in this group as well. And we're really happy to look forward to them and learn from their ability. And they have that decision making positions that has impacted the working of how women will work in science, technology, and innovation. And then we should have a systemic gender looking glass along with the gender specific policies and legal interventions, making all policies and program. We need to inculcate this into our cultural aspect. So this was the kind of a snapshot of a report. I'll drop the link of that report. It's a UNESCO report initiated by the Jakarta office that talks about what are the key assets that are held in the system for gender, what are the key gaps, and how we can proceed forward. So with this, I move to the second aspect of my talk, in which I'll focus more on what efforts India has taken in terms of promoting the gender participation in science, technology, and innovation. As I specified that we have a dedicated policy chapter. For the very first time, we have a dedicated section for equity and inclusion. By equity and inclusion, we means that we are aspiring an equitable participation in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, management, and innovation with respect not only to gender, but also to social, regional, and economic diversity in the country. So we are talking about having a mainstreaming equity and inclusion. The idea that we have to promote each and every group in a country with along with the women participation, that is the first foremost agenda for the science policies to focus on. We are going to address it as a subtext to all STI policies and processes. So this is one of the revolutionary steps that the government of India has been projecting, that whether it be a policy of electronics, be it a policy of communication, be it an economic policy, we need to have a subtext that will address that this much of a gender participation is required, and there is a need to promote the other groups to come forward. Then we need to have institutionalizing equity and inclusion by on the lines of, all must have heard about Ithana Swan Charter, that is Scientific Women's Academic Network Charter. From on that basis, we are trying it to create for India a network of women scientists, researchers, in which they can discuss their problems and they can mitigate what we can do it for the further enrichment. Then we need to create an awareness, outreach, and mentorship. These are the policy level intervention, specifically in terms of recruitment, retention, and promotion of women in scientific field. We are talking about creating an ageism related issues and minimization of the career breaks for women. And I must applaud DST has taken specific steps in that by introducing women scientist program schemes, in which women, when they have taken a break due to any family circumstances, mainly the maternity break they have taken, they can come back after that break to the scientific field, and government is providing that mechanism. Then we are talking about the flexibility of the work timings. We are talking about childcare benefits and to make it more gender neutral, and then other issues that are regarded with the women who are working in this particular field. And then the other aspect that we are strongly focusing is on assessing the equity and inclusion, that it's high time we need to evaluate how these policies, these programs are working and what better they are doing for India. So that is the snapshot how the India's upcoming national science, technology, and innovation policy is working on. And I'm really happy that Department of Science and Technology, they have number of programs. If I have to start up, they have gender advancement for transforming institution. That's a Gati pilot program has already been started by DST. We have women scientist program schemes. Then we have a dedicated program that was started in name of Curie, that was consolidation of university research for innovation and excellence in women university, where we are stimulating the women oriented universities to come forward and participate in this ecosystem. Then we have mobility schemes that are addressing relocation issues of women scientists. Likewise, we have a dedicated program that was started by a science and engineering research board known as SERB in India, that is exclusively for promoting opportunities for women in exploratory research. The name itself is very powerful. The acronym becomes POWER. And this POWER program is specifically to mitigate the gender disparity in science and engineering research, and more in terms of funding in various S&T programs in Indian academic institutes. With this, I'll just end my talk with a focus that we need to bring up more of a gender and gender science diplomacy as well. And as Paulina has already given us the snapshot for how why it is required, I'll urge the government representatives to take forward the factor that we need to have more women ambassadors, and we need to have more women foreign officials that are representing India on the global platform. Thank you so much once again, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Radhika. You made some very relevant observations regarding gender equality on science and research, particularly in terms of gender gap, institutional constraints, and socio-cultural stereotypes. Thank you so much.